I don't see any reason that we shouldn't move right on to our final presentation of the evening. It is a wonderful panel discussion moderated by Varun Ranjan. And we have on this wonderful panel, let's see here, we have quite the lineup here. We would like to introduce Henry St. Casilla, who is the co-founder and managing partner of the Conscious Fund. Doug Drysdale, who is the CEO of Cybin Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Jim Kuo, who is the CEO of Return Health. Olivia Mannix, who is the founder and chief strategy officer of Aphrodite Health. Dr. Suren Gudelaka, right? Who is the co-founder of April 19 Discovery, Inc. And that is quite the lineup, all moderated by Dr. Varun Ranjan. And so they're going to speak to us today on the topic of Renaissance in Psychedelics in CNS medicine. So we're going to begin that recorded panel right now.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our session today. We're really excited to talk about the future of psychedelics. There's been quite a bit of a resurgence recently within the space, but there's a lot of potential that people have not thought about and a lot of considerations that are quite critical to be thinking about moving forward. So we've put together a fantastic panel today to talk about some of those considerations and what you need to be thinking about as you invest in psychedelics in the future. I'm going to go quickly through a round of introductions. So perhaps we could just start one by one. And Henri, I'm going to put up some slides and perhaps we could start off with you.
Thank you very much. So I am Henri St. I am one of the two founding partners at the Conscious Fund. We are the most active early stage venture investor in psychedelics. We have nearly 22 companies in our portfolio already, and we've also incubated 13 psychedelic companies. So we're a broad sector expert, and our focus really is on the financial aspects of the psychedelic medicine market.
Wonderful. Olivia, if you could introduce yourself as well, please.
Thanks so much for having me today. My name is Olivia Mannix. I am a co-founder and chief strategist for Aphrodite Health. We are a psychedelics drug development company focused on pain management as well as mood disorders for women by women.
Wonderful. And Jim will be attending as well. But just to go a little bit into his background as well, he's currently the CEO of Return Health, which is a company focused on developing psychedelics for dementia and neurodegenerative diseases. Certainly quite an area of interest, recently given the approval of aducanumab and the recent investment resurgence within Alzheimer's and dementia itself. Suren, if you could quickly introduce yourself as well, please.
Yeah, so I'm Suren. I'm a co-founder of April 19, and we are an AI-driven drug discovery company completely focused on discovering new psychedelic compounds.
Wonderful. And I'm Varun Ranjan. I'm an associate principal with Blue Matter Consulting, which is a life science strategy consulting firm focused globally. I specifically lead our CNS Center of Excellence, which is to all commercial considerations within CNS, and recently have done quite a bit of work within psychedelics. So with that, CNS has certainly seen quite a bit of a resurgence within the pharma industry recently. A lot of companies such as Pfizer and Lilly and AstraZeneca had started to move away, but recently in the last 5 years, seen quite a bit of a resurgence. It's been the area where you've seen truly targeted therapies like RNA therapies, gene therapies. There has been the recent approval of aducanumab for Alzheimer's, which is quite a watershed moment earlier this year. And more recently, and quite excitingly, interestingly, there's been quite a resurgence within psychedelics. Certainly quite a taboo around psychedelics, but the therapeutic potential, which has been used in different ways for thousands of years, there's a greater understanding specifically about how it can actually be used to treat a variety of CNS diseases. There are approved psychedelics, and there's been some robust data specifically within mood disorders, but there's a lot of potential beyond what is currently being studied, what's currently known, and those are some of the topics we do want to talk about today. So getting into that itself, Henri, what are some of the risks that are involved in investing within psychedelics? And what are some of the key things that investors should be looking for moving forward?
The most prevalent risk is just the sheer complexity of the projects. They are, I mean, we're talking about fixing the brain, which is still very poorly understood. The mechanism of action, the effects of these drugs, there is quite a lot of complexity that is built into each company. It's a complex market. Many people think it's still a startup market, but in fact it's quite mature and there are several hundred participants already. So one of the risks is that you're unaware of the interaction between the company that you're investing into and the broader market, other CNS companies. The risk, I guess, generally is that investors dip into a market that really needs a full-time focus and a considerable infrastructure to consider all these elements that make it complex. That, for me, I think is the most prevalent current risk.
So to that point, certainly we have seen esketamine from Janssen get approved. There's quite robust phase 3 data for MAPS with MDMA right now, and waiting excitingly about the psilocybin data from Compass within the next couple of months. So certainly there's been big players and emerging players in this space. What is preventing this from going more mainstream? Is it just more data, or are there other considerations to make psychedelics more mainstream in terms of day-to-day clinical medicine?
It's still relatively early in its development. It is moving at a very accelerated pace, but you've got to allow for these companies to get through clinical trials. You've got to allow for jurisdictions to open up in terms of new clinics and using base compounds rather than medicines. You've got to allow for more investment. So the sector is moving very quickly towards the mainstream, but if you look at the size of the patient population that could be helped by these drugs, it's vast. And going from 0 to hundreds of millions of patients globally is just going to take time. I think we're at the beginning of the beginning. And as you start to get more drugs into the market, more patients talking, because ultimately it's patient demand that will drive the growth of this sector. As patients start to talk about this stuff more and it becomes normal rather than something unusual to be discussed, it just becomes a regular treatment. At that point, you will have a mainstream psychedelics industry. I think we're several years, maybe 7 or 10 years from that. But most data would suggest that the industry is actually increasing its push towards the mainstream. So there's definitely an acceleration in that direction. And it could happen earlier than there are, many circumstances in which celebrity-driven usage or public health usage, because it's lower cost, could really broaden this into the mainstream much more rapidly.
Absolutely, I think that's a wonderful point. And getting certainly back to the whole concept of the CNS revolution, CNS has actually become the second biggest book of business for venture capitalists, specifically after oncology. And so certainly this is quite forward-looking. Even if this is 7 to 10 years away, this is potentially a time to start thinking about investing within the space, because the regulatory hurdles are perhaps becoming less, clinical development is speeding up. Certainly a big component of clinical development is actually optimizing the molecules or looking for the appropriate molecules to go ahead and test. So sir, thinking about that from a drug discovery perspective, what are some of the costs and timings that are going to be critical to be thinking about from an investor perspective as companies or researchers start to look into new derivatives of psychedelics? And how can this process be expedited moving forward?
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with Henri that we are very much really at the beginning of this whole sector, right? So, and I think to answer your question, why don't you see a lot more sort of traction in this space? It's simply time, right? You simply need the time for these compounds to finish their phase 3 trials, which if it all goes well, will happen in the next couple of years. In terms of the kind of the main game, if you like, from the several publicly listed companies, and obviously there's only a handful of these companies. There are about 3 or 4 which are sort of $1 billion plus, but as you know, that's also very small in the sort of broader pharma market comparative valuations. So, but if you take a lot of these companies, what they're doing is they're trying to do 2 things, right? Either they are trying to take well-known compounds that are open source, doing clinical trials and getting some sort of data privileges or data monopolies for a certain time period. Or the other types of companies, and sometimes they're doing both, is trying to take existing open source compounds and trying to sort of explore that space, that chemical space, if you like, nearby, and trying to create derivatives using traditional sort of medicinal chemistry type approaches, with the view that you can actually patent these new compounds. And once you have a patent privilege of these compounds, then you go through the clinical trials, and then you'll have a monopoly right on these new derivatives for the next 17 years, for example. So that's broadly what's happening in pretty much, I would say, all of the psychedelic drug discovery companies. Now, but then the backdrop to that is obviously what's happening is the whole AI revolution. So as you know, AI is pretty much eating up every industry, that's out there, and drug discovery is no different. So just to give you a very quick statistic, typically, a drug, to bring a drug to market used to take, $1 to $2 billion and about 10 years. But now using this AI methods, this sort of pretty advanced sort of pattern recognition methods, we can go from roughly from an idea on a blackboard to say an initial compound in something like 45 to 50 days. So you can sort of see this sort of speed up in time. And obviously that is correlated also with respect to speed up in the money you spend to bring these drugs from initial ideas all the way to preclinical to compounds that you can take to the next stages. And we think this is going to have a dramatic impact in the whole area of psychedelic drug discovery, just like you're seeing AI in all of the other areas of drug discovery. And in the next couple of years, you'll see, or frankly, in the next few months, you'll see a few big companies going public, as in like AI-driven drug discovery companies that have raised a few $100 million going public. You'll see that, and I think they'll create an enormous amount of value. Those are in general companies focused on cardiology, focused on oncology and so forth. And what we're trying to do is apply some of the best of breed AI techniques, but purely focused on psychedelics. And our sort of bet, if you like, is by specializing in this particular area, you get a lot of domain knowledge, and the chances of us, discovering something unique are much higher. And I think that is proven already with the one client that we have.
That's very exciting to hear. And certainly when I think about that, everyone does think about psychedelics and mapping those very much to mood disorders such as major depressive disorder and PTSD. What is the potential for AI to start elucidating potential clinical applicability of psychedelics for diseases outside of mood disorders?
Right. So let me try and answer that again by taking a step back, right? So if you take civilization knowledge, if you like, has been very good sort of mechanism over the thousands of years, finding whether it's mushrooms or other plant-based compounds that have worked for X, Y, and Z conditions, or particular that elicit certain responses. Now, and similarly, you've seen, say, the person who got the Nobel Prize in 2015, who actually took a traditional Chinese medicine, and actually that was artemisinin, and sort of took a slight take on that, and produced the most sort of effective malaria drug we've seen ever. So if you take civilizational knowledge, what that means is that you would have a lot of people over time who would have taken different mushrooms. Some of them would have died, some of them would have not died, and the ones that produce goodness, if you like, and what we call a fitness or a fitness function, those things survived over time. And obviously that's why you see these things over the years. Things like magic mushrooms, so forth, which are traditional plant medicines. And what's happened over the last sort of 50 years, particularly people like Sasha Shulgin, who have taken some of those initial points and with very excellent medicinal chemistry have explored that space a bit further. So obviously, you know, MDMA and all these sort of other compounds that he did some amazing work there. And in that case, the fitness function of how good these compounds were frankly him and his wife. You know, they consumed them themselves. Obviously, very high risk strategy too, but that's what they did. Now, so you can see that what they're doing is they're taking these sort of chemical structures, they're taking a carbon bit out, adding a hydrogen thing, and you're sort of searching the space of possibilities. Now, if you look at it from a computational point of view, what that is that you are effectively taking a whole bunch of variables, whole bunch of factors. And in this case, we're coming in slightly from outside, so we can see up to 100 different variables, 100 different factors. And in this case, like say a 100-dimensional space, if you like. And you know, whether it's mood disorders, whether it's pain management, whether it's something else, what you're basically seeing is that a certain chemical structure eliciting a certain response from a, you know, it doesn't kill you, it's not toxic, it's bioavailable, and it docks with a receptor like 2A and perhaps doesn't dock with 2B, for example. So the way we see it is that, you know, we can search this space, you know, using this technique at such efficient way. It's almost as if we had like 100,000 medicinal chemists, you know, with us. So what that means is that whether it's mood disorders or whether it's pain management or whether it's addiction cessation, we think we can traverse this whole space really efficiently, you know, really in a profound way, we think. And that is not only for screening existing compounds or finding derivations of this, but also to look at entirely new approaches, entirely new novel compounds using what is called generative AI. So we think we have a whole bunch of tools and perhaps a slightly different philosophy to this whole sector. And we think, you know, we have a, you know, slightly new angle to it. So the way to answer your question, I think in all of these things, we don't make much of a distinction whether it's a mood disorder or pain management or otherwise, because ultimately it is a compound that is hopefully new because you can file for patents, but also elicits a response for your desired receptors. And provided you go through those checks, then we think we have a much higher chance of success. Now, saying all of that, this is all computational. It's not the real world. There's nothing like doing stuff in a lab, right? So there's a bit of a disconnect between, you know, what we do using AI stuff and in a lab. So the labs are still super important. But what we're saying is that you can reduce the time, effort, money that you spend in a lab and massively increase the chances of success. That answers your question.
All right, wonderful. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. So certainly one of the diseases you did touch upon was pain management. And that is a disease that has certainly taken quite a big role within society, certainly considering the opioid epidemic and the overdosing that does happen. And there's certainly been a movement to try and minimize opioids, and certainly seen what's happened to a company like Purdue, who did have massive settlements. So there is a need for new treatment options outside of opioids. So Olivia, thinking from that, what are some strategies or what are some of the potential for psychedelics to help treat pain specifically?
Sure. So literature suggests that chronic pain is basically altered plasticity in the brain. And it's actually, thank you for the slides, is basically an intense pain despite the lack of injury. So for instance, if you see the chart on the right-hand side, you step on a nail and immediately you'll get a cut, there may be blood, what have you. Sometimes if you step on a nail, you'll feel pain long after the actual event takes place. And this is surrounding the chronic pain arena. And basically what happens is there is not pain at that time, but it's pain that's long lasting after the injury. So what we found is that this is related to the neuroplasticity in the brain. And if you could go to the next slide. It has been shown that psychedelics actually can increase neuroplasticity in the brain. So basically, there's ways to rewire through neurogenesis the different neurons that actually can keep pain from being chronic and actually potentially reverse it. And that's actually something that we're looking at Aphrodite Health with specific types of pain. And it's really fascinating because right now with chronic pain, opioids are used, and then also antidepressants, which really aren't, in my opinion, the best way to treat these indications. So, we're really excited to see how psychedelics can actually really help with the opioid crisis. And actually, last year alone, there was nearly 250 million prescriptions of opiates in the US. So unlike opiates, psychedelics do not appear to be addictive, and it's a really interesting compound that we're looking at for this neurogenesis to occur. So we're really excited to be looking into this.
Wonderful. And this sounds like this could potentially be almost pre-opioids or help to spare opioids specifically, potentially given in conjunction with something as benign as even like an Advil or acetaminophen.
Correct, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, 250 million prescriptions does still sound like quite a dramatic number, but if you look at the numbers from previous years, that's a number that is quite coming down. And I think that is a number you're going to see continuously to decrease over the next 5 to 10 years. And that potential for psychedelics to help replace the opioids, not just to even treat chronic pain, but even to help potentially treat the addiction to opioids or some of the more illicit versions of opioids is quite interesting as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I mean, you wouldn't think that a psychedelic could have all these amazing opportunities, but it's, again, just showing what an incredible market this is, and it's just a great time to get in.
So transitioning on from pain, which is certainly quite a huge area of focus, especially here in the US, but another area within medicine, especially within CNS, that has always had attracted a lot of interest, and more so recently, is certainly dementia, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's. There has been an increasing investment sentiment exponentially, especially since the approval of aducanumab within the past couple of months. However, there's still uncertainties and controversies about what actually the underlying pathophysiology is of a disease such as Alzheimer's itself. Given that, Jim, from your perspective, how can psychedelics be positioned in dementia relative to some of the other therapies that are on the market?
Varun, let me begin by thanking you for the opportunity to speak at this conference. And this is an excellent question because, Alzheimer's is generally regarded as a graveyard of a lot of drugs. There haven't been really any successful drugs. There's been lots of attempts. You referenced the Biogen approval recently, which I think is a sea change, tipping point with approvals for drugs. Even though despite the fact that that drug does not appear to be very efficacious, if at all. So really the question becomes, will psychedelics prove to be different or not? And I think that is the main question. And let me say that, yeah, it is not clear exactly what the problem is with Alzheimer's, if you want to speak about that. It's believed to involve something with cholesterol transport because patients with a certain genotype, ApoE4, have increased predisposition to Alzheimer's. But beyond that, people don't know. There's obviously the plaques and tangles. That's the pathophysiology. Whether that's a cause or the effect, it's unclear. So there are a lot of unknowns here. But let me address it this way, which is, drugs have to work. They have to work if they're going to get approved and or be used. Okay, so really the question is, will they work or not? And the situation is the FDA doesn't absolutely care that how your drug works or what even the cause of the disease is. The question is really, does your drug help the patients or not? So we at Return Health have chosen to break down the problem into two parts. One is the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. It's summarized as BPSD. And the other one is cognitive decline. And that's what most people think about when they think about Alzheimer's. They think about the loss of memory, the ability to do simple math, to pay your bills, those type of things. But the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia are just as important. They're part of the very early stages of the disease, and we're focused on treating that. And I would make the point that those symptoms include agitation, depression, those type of symptoms, anxiety. They're really not different from what psychedelics have already been shown to be effective in particular with depressed patients or patients with PTSD. Psychedelics are highly effective. And if you are familiar with patients with PTSD or depression, it's never a case where they're just depressed or they just have post-traumatic stress disorder. They also have underlying anxiety. PTSD has depression as well. And also psychedelics have been shown to work in cancer patients with those type of symptoms. We think that the symptomology is very similar between dementia patients, cancer patients, PTSD, as well as clinical depression. And that's why we think we'll be successful.
So understanding that certainly everyone, when they think of dementia, always thinks of Alzheimer's first, but there's certainly many different subtypes within Alzheimer's, and oftentimes the diagnosis of Alzheimer's versus, say, vascular versus Lewy body dementia is difficult to elucidate in clinical practice. That to me implies that psychedelics could theoretically help to treat the spectrum of dementia diseases without necessarily knowing which one is which.
Exactly, and that's the point. So, dementia is the umbrella term for a set of symptoms. Alzheimer's is the largest cause of dementia, but there are other ones like frontotemporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, as you referenced. And our strategy is to go over the dementia, the umbrella term, and there's a couple reasons for that. It basically is a much larger market because we're not just talking about Alzheimer's, we're talking about Alzheimer's plus all these other types of dementia. And we also, intrinsically believe, because we're not purely a Alzheimer's mechanism, our drugs, we believe, will work through three mechanisms. One is neuroplasticity, which psychedelics, are well known to induce. Okay, so neuroplasticity. The other one is neurogenesis, which is not obviously known about the psychedelics, but they do induce neurogenesis, the growth of nerve cells. The last one, also not well known, is neural inflammation. So when brain cells are dying, there's a lot of inflammation associated with that. Psychedelics are known to reduce that inflammation. So really three targets, but they're not necessarily specific to Alzheimer's, but to dementia overall, and that's why we're targeting dementia.
So with that, I want to thank all the panelists. Certainly, there's been a lot of interest and a resurgence within psychedelics. Everyone started to understand the potential across mood disorders. Of course, a lot of the classic ones, such as psilocybin and ketamine, but certainly there is a much greater potential to use a greater variety of psychedelics across a variety of neurological diseases. And as you move forward and thinking about what's next within CNS, this certainly is an area that I think is going to come to fruition over the next 7 to 10 years across a variety of the different diseases that we've already discussed today. So I want to really just thank all the panelists for all their time and insights. And with that, certainly welcome a Q&A and welcome questions from the audience.
Thank you very much.
Now, I believe we have an encore. So let us stand by for that. Or did we get through that already? Perhaps we did. That was shorter than I thought. It was supposed to be 27. Okay, anyway, welcome all. I guess that was it. I wonder if we played the wrong one. Varun, did we play the right one?
Yes, we did.
Okay, good, good. The transition was so smooth, I didn't even notice it. How was that?
Editing is all you.
No, it was you. Anyway, listen, so honored to have you here. So honored to have your esteemed panel here. You guys are joining from all over the globe, right? You pulled it off.
Yeah, I think all the way from the West Coast all the way through Germany right now.
That's fantastic. Well, the questions are rolling in here, so let's get these to you. Anyone who would like to take this is not directed to anyone in particular. would you please expand upon the research into psychedelic-induced neurogenesis, please?
Jim, how about you? Yeah.
Yeah, if no one else will take it up, I will take it.
Please.
And that's a great question. So this is a property that's been noted also with SSRIs, Prozacs, that class of drugs, that they actually do induce neurogenesis, the growth of nerve cells. This is a little bit different from the strengthening of neural connections that have been recently discovered with the Yale research. So we believe that we're just building upon that. Clearly, the serotonin system is well known to induce neurogenesis. Psychedelics are even more potent than the SSRIs, and that's great. And this is something that we can take advantage of in treating dementia patients because, you know, that's exactly what you need, right? If your brain is injured, cells are dying, you want to grow new nerve cells, and that's what psychedelics can do.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Something to add to that. I mean, when you think of serotonin specifically, I think the known mechanisms of psychedelics have been very known to really potentiate the effects of serotonin, specifically the serotonin 2A, which is often responsible for the most profound effects within psychedelics itself. So I think to Jim's point, that really starts to explain that mechanism of the neurogenesis itself.
Very good. Anyone else before we move on to the next question on that one? Okay. All right. Next question. Brian asks, with regard to Alzheimer's and dementia, what is the mechanism of action when targeting these diseases with psychedelics? The mechanism of action.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I wanted to further elaborate on the points I made during the panel discussion, which is, you know, it's clearly not known what the cause of Alzheimer's is. And that's part of the problem. So if you don't know the problem and you're trying to solve it, like, for example, people thought, well, it seems obvious that you remove the plaques, tangles from the brains of these patients, and that will treat Alzheimer's. And that is still very questionable, again, because you don't know whether it's the cause or effect. So we've taken a different approach, which is we don't necessarily have to know the exact cause of Alzheimer's. We're treating it through three mechanisms, okay? So let me be very clear about that. First one is neuroplasticity, which is generally regarded as rewiring the brain. So if the brain is damaged, you want to rewire it around the damaged points. That would be something fairly obvious that you would want to do. Second one, which was part of the earlier question, neurogenesis, you'd want to grow new nerve cells. And the third one, I also mentioned that during my panel discussion, is there's inflammation. Anytime you have cells dying, you have inflammation taking place because inflammation is part of the process of clearing these dead cells away. And you want to mitigate that. And that's also another not well-known property of psychedelics. So really three mechanisms of action we're using to treat dementia patients.
Very good. Okay. Anyone else on that question?
Yeah, I think just to add to there as well, certainly to Jim's point, I don't think we quite understand dementia yet. Yes, the amyloid antibody did get approved, but it's still quite mixed in terms of even the dosing itself. There were still some side effect concerns. Not all patients get that cognitive decline. We did see even in the last 1 week, the other very much hypothesis has been certainly tau. And we did see the Roche AC Immune data that read at their phase 2 that wasn't quite significant that we would have hoped for as either. So I think it just really shows that we need to start thinking about newer mechanisms and newer hypotheses of how you treat Alzheimer's itself. We have seen other companies trying to approach this, and let's see what does play out for that. But I think there needs to be continued investment and continued research into the causes of dementia itself.
Okay. As it relates to the treatment of PTSD, have there been any studies that have outlined the efficacy of this? And anyone who would like to speak to that, whoever would be the expert in that field, the PTSD.
Yep, I'm happy to. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead, please. No, please go ahead.
So, I mean, I'm just sort of, I guess, replaying data, which is, very recent and has been, widely reported in the media. So, MAPS, the nonprofit organization, did some groundbreaking studies in PTSD using MDMA, the phase 3 results. And the headline is that when you have, after 2 sessions of MDMA and psychotherapy, these all is combined, after 2 sessions, that 67% of people who are classified as PTSD are not classified as having PTSD after these 2 doses, which is like, unbelievable results. And hope these sort of results, continue. But those are the kind of headline results, and obviously we need a bit more time to see how the final results turn out. But so far, I think it seems to be encouraging.
And I think that's what's really incredible. If you think of a treatment or a disease like PTSD right now, you're treating it chronically with an SSRI, and you try the next therapy. This, to Suren's point, 2-3 treatments over a course of 10-14 weeks, and 67% of patients do no longer show having PTSD. So I think that's really shows what the potential of these new molecules are. To really show a shorter time frame, and you're getting potentially almost, don't want to use the word cure, but just get these really truly profound effects that you're seeing in these patients is pretty incredible. And it does look like that potential treatment will be available in early 2023.
Okay, very good. Then I'll just throw this in there. We do have a couple other questions after this, but when it comes to the treatment of PTSD, of course, the concept is the rewiring of the neural pathways. But is there anything anyone can speak to as to experientially what the patient might go through as far as seeing their circumstances from a different perspective and how that helps them? What does the patient experience while this is happening that is really making the difference, whereas the traditional psychotherapist and the traditional drugs just aren't doing it? Anyone?
So just to kind of, I guess, I haven't taken I can't talk through experience, but I think that the broad rationale of all of these sort of psychedelics with respect to very deep-rooted mood disorders like PTSD is that it goes to unroot somehow, bring the trauma a bit in front of you, if you like, as opposed to all the other therapeutics, which is sort of patching it up. So that's a kind of the broad, phenomenon, if you like. But I don't know whether people have really done. I'm sure in the MAP study, if you look at the appendices, I'm sure they all have appendices about their individual subjective experience of that. But I can't comment on that. But I think one comment I can make is this sort of notion that you can get access to trauma, or you allow this window of opportunity to deal with it in a kind of more fundamental way, as opposed to the other therapies which have been very much on the surface. But Varun or somebody else might be able to add to that.
Thank you, Saran.
I can just say that my understanding is that patients under psychedelics, this is macrodosing, enter what is described as a dissociative state or psychedelic state. Basically, they're displaced from their current surroundings. They experience synesthesias, which is, they may smell sound, for example. It's not normally how we perceive certain stimuli. And also ego tends to dissolve as well. So that goes away. Time seems to dissolve as well. Different parts of the brain start talking to each other. fMRI scans show that the default mode network is operative there, and different parts of the brain are talking that normally don't. And patients enter a brain state that physicians describe as pre-7-year-old. So children, as we may know, have tremendous neuroplasticity. That's why they're able to learn, and right around the age of 7 or so, our brain's networks are pretty much solidified, and we're not capable of learning to the extent that younger children are. Even though they don't appear to be learning, they are picking up tremendous amounts of information about the world. So it induces that type of pre-7-year-old brain state. and it's only temporary. The effects are really quite dramatic. So we talked about PTSD, but it's not just a 67% response rate. It's the fact that it works really right away. So for those familiar with SSRIs, they take weeks to work. They only work in less than 50% of patients. You have to take them every single day as well. And in the case of psychedelics, 2 doses might be good for 6 months or longer. I think it's fair to say that if patients no longer meet the description of a disease state, they are effectively cured. I mean, we'll wait and see if that is the case or not. And that's what's gotten everyone tremendously excited. This truly appears to be a game changer. Could you imagine if you took a pill twice and your lipid levels, if you have dyslipidemias, high LDLs, just went away for the rest of your life? I mean, we would say that was miraculous. And we're talking about something very similar, except for the brain.
Yeah, we would. The drug companies might not like it as much because there's not as many pills to dispense. But yes, exactly. From the recipient standpoint, it makes much more sense. We have 2 more questions that I want to make certain that we get through while you all are here. And it's back on the Alzheimer's and dementia topic. So when do you think we may be able to see psychedelic treatments for Alzheimer's and dementia on the market?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be a lot quicker than people expect. Typically, the FDA requires 2 clinical trials for approval. The recent experience with Biogen suggests that they are being very aggressive, and the term is lowering the bar for approval. The FDA can pretty much raise and lower the bar as they deem is appropriate. In the case of Alzheimer's/dementia, they are lowering the bar. The evidence of that is the FDA approved Biogen's drug based on what are called surrogate markers. So that's not on any sort of gain of function. It's based on clearance of the amyloid plaques, which may or may not correlate with therapeutic benefit. Okay, so the FDA is going back to what they used to do. It used to be that the FDA said if your drug lowers blood sugar, well, you have a diabetes drug that lowers blood pressure, you have a hypertension drug, cholesterol drug, lowering, that sort of thing. And they moved away from that in recent years, the last decade or so. And they look like in case of Alzheimer's dementia, they're allowing that to proceed. And the other thing the FDA has discretion with is they can allow a drug to be approved on a single clinical trial if it's multi-site. The verbiage in the language is that you need multiple clinical trials, plural, but there have been times when they think the clinical need is so desperate that they will approve based on a single clinical trial that's multi-site.
I think to add to that point as well, and I think we've seen this more in oncology, we'll not be surprised this comes to CNS and neuro as well, is that there's a variety of regulatory pathways such as accelerated approvals, breakthrough status that the FDA is giving for diseases of high unmet need. They did do that for Alzheimer's with Biogen. They have done it with Lilly's there. We've seen it in spinal muscular atrophy. We've seen a lot of diseases of unmet need. And I think that's in the diseases we've talked about today, dementia and pain. Those are 2 of the most acute diseases that have significant unmet need that affect millions and millions of people. So hypothesizing, you never know what the FDA may do, but to that point, these are areas where there could potentially be a fast-tracked development. And even in terms of like drug discovery, if you have the right molecule that you optimize, that the potential to move those through clinical trial development and get that commercial approval is significantly different than it was just even a few years ago, like you see in oncology.
Thank you. Okay. So just to follow up on that, which way may or may not be, or well, maybe not quite. The questions keep coming in. This is great. A follow up on the previous question. Do you have some estimate of how much was allocated to this space so far, and what your projections are for the next 3 to 5 years?
It's a question, how much was allocated to dementia? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, all right. I think I understand it here. I'll read it again. Do you have some estimate as to how much was allocated to this space, meaning the psychedelic space that you're talking about here in general, so far, and what your projections are for the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think this is cutting edge, frontier, leading.
Yeah.
I describe it as psychedelics 2.0. 1.0 is going gangbusters. The results have been really breakthrough. That is defined as for PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, macrodosing. We're doing something very different. We're obviously doing a different indication, which some people would, I think, not argue with, is extremely challenging. But putting that aside, we're also dealing with drugs that will be modest or non-hallucinogenic, chronic dosing as well. So this is one where we believe we're the leaders in this field.
I'm certain you are.
And just to add to that, thinking about just investments in psychedelics, if we just look at some of the things that have happened in the past few years, there have been multi-billion-dollar IPOs in terms of a company like an Atai or a Compass that have had significant IPO. You know, you've seen a lot of venture capital money funded into this space. You see some venture capitals that are only focused on psychedelics, such as the Conscious Fund. So there's this clear interest in funding this. Peter Thiel, who's always been known as the Facebook buy, has put in significant money into this space itself. On the Toronto Stock Exchange, you can actually trade a psychedelic-related ETF. So I think there's a lot of investment coming to this space. In terms of how much there's been allocated to date, not quite sure I have a number, but I can say it's been a relatively significant investment. And I would not be surprised if that investment continues to expedite and grow over the next few years. You may also start to see a lot of big pharma who's starting to invest in this space come into this space a little bit more strongly over the next few years as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add to that. This is an incredibly great time to get in because you can buy low and there's just such a major upside and just so many different channels that you can get involved in. And a lot of these companies that we're presenting today are really outstanding. So
maybe in a not so distant MedInvest event, we could actually have some corporate company presentations on this topic with this particular subject. We could look forward to that, and maybe MedInvest could be one of the edgy forums where you're welcome, because you are absolutely welcome. All right. I don't see any additional questions. It's been a fantastic day here, but I definitely don't want to end this because I'm thoroughly enjoying this. Anyone want to share anything in closing here before we go, and before we go to final remarks for the day?
None for me other than to thank you for creating this venue. It's been really wonderful to get the word out about what everyone is doing here.
Excellent. No, you're very welcome. Well, thank you to all of you, wherever you are in the world, not only those of us on the panel, but there on the audience. Varun, thank you so much for making this panel happen.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And thank you to all the panelists here as well. This has really been a wonderful session.
Yeah, thank you so much. Where can we see any follow-up information for the audience to maybe get a recap or some more information on our companies?
This is Elena. I think AJ froze there. I'm sorry. This is the first time he froze at a 2-day conference. How do my camera? Let's see. We will, well, typically, if you would be a presenter, you would be contacted through the partnering system where all the presenters on specific technologies are participating. We will get back to you as soon as we receive any questions from anyone, investors or research institutions. We will reach out to you ourselves. But we do welcome you to present in the future.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for everyone.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
See ya. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. I don't know if we're going to get our host back or not. And I cannot start my video without him. Okay, start my video. Well, AJ, if you can hear me, I cannot start my video. I see you're sending me messages to start the video, and I click on this and nothing happens. Well, doesn't matter. I just wanted to thank everyone who's still there at this late hour for participating in the conference. And this concludes our 2 days of the conference. We very much enjoyed learning about all the innovative technologies presented in this conference. We would like to send special thanks to the presenting companies who worked very hard to prepare their presentations and deliver them to us in a timely manner. We will enjoy the speakers and the panels, very informative discussions. Thank you very much, Varun. I see you still there. Wonderful job. Thank you very much on putting this together. Very informative, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot from our audience, and we'll reach out to you. And I hope you participate again. Now, of course, special thanks to AJ, our technical host, who was juggling all the presentations and kept smiling for 2 days, non-stop. He also spent the night putting everyone in the partnering system, making sure everyone is accommodated and has their logins. So thank you for that, AJ. We work for about 3 months to prepare each conference, so we welcome your feedback, suggestions, positive and negative. We're always changing, always innovating things here at MedInvest. So what's next? The partnering system will be open tomorrow for meetings. It will remain open for communications for another 2 weeks. If anyone wants to schedule meetings in that time frame, you can send your own Zoom link. And please, we encourage you to continue communicating. The links with your videos and Q&As will be available on Monday. If you do not want us, they will only be available to the participants of the conference. If for some reasons you do not want to share that information, please let us know and we'll make sure not to share your presentation. I will also email everyone with this information. So the next conference will be on oncology in November. So if it's relevant to you, please reach out to us. Investors, of course, you're always welcome to participate. Not clear what's going on with JP Morgan in January yet, but provided they do have a conference in San Francisco, it's very likely that we will be there as well. And so we look forward to seeing everyone at some point in person, and can't wait for that, to be honest, after such a long time of virtual live. Well, thank you again, and we hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Elena. On behalf of myself, Bob, Elena, Bill Workmeister, and all of us here at MedInvest, thank you for being here. Thank you for making this possible. Take care, everyone. Until next time, I'm AJ Palmgren. Take care. Bye-bye.